There are many factors to consider when designing a new garden, and it can be quite daunting. But if you take it one step at a time, it's very doable. And today I begin my garden design with what I consider the most important step, and that's observation. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and today, for the very first time, I'm standing in my new backyard. I bought a house, I've moved in, and now it's time to start thinking about my garden, where it's going to go, what it's going to look like. And when I say garden, I'm actually talking about a series of gardens. I'm talking about an herb garden, and a greenhouse, and a small orchard, and of course, a vegetable garden, along with everything else that I can fit in this half-acre space. I have these ideas. I put some of them down on paper, but I don't know if the ideas will work until I observe the space. I have to look for those important factors that will make the difference between a successful garden and a garden that fails. Observation is one of the important principles of permaculture garden design, but that's not why I advocate it. I've been suggesting observation to promising gardeners for years, long before I even knew what permaculture really was. And that's because you really need to look. You need to think about where you're putting your garden. Too many gardens fail because gardeners put them in a spot they think will work without observing all of the factors that influence that spot. And how much time should it take? Well, I usually recommend a year. Yes, a solid year before you put in a permanent garden space. That's so you can see the entire cycle of the seasons, so you can observe animal patterns, so you can decide how you're going to approach the garden and work in it. Because I've seen many gardens fail when the gardener decides they want to put a garden in a particular space because they think it'll work, and then after a year or two or three of struggling, they figure out that really wasn't the best spot at all. A little observation ahead of time really can make it a success. So what is it I look for as part of observation? Well, the number one thing is the sun. Plants require the sun. In fact, most of the plants that we grow require at least 6 hours of direct sun each day during the growing season. One of the reasons I really liked this lot and this house is because my backyard has almost ideal access to the sun. Now, I'm looking to the south, and to the south I have absolutely no obstructions. I do have a shed, and it will cast a little shade, but for the most part, there is nothing that stands in the way between the sun and the plants that I'll be putting in my garden. If you look behind me, you'll see that my neighbor has a lot of tall, established trees. They'll cast a lot of shade. If those trees were on the south side of my property, that would be a completely different consideration. I would have to really limit the plants that I choose to grow if I had those kind of trees obstructing the sunlight. So, as you observe your space, look at how the sun plays into that space. Does it provide enough light for where you want to put your plants? Are there obstructions? And think about the seasons, because those trees behind me, well, those are mostly deciduous trees. They'll have leaves during the summer, which will shade all the space behind it, but those leaves will fall. So during the winter, the sunlight will actually reach a lot of that space. That could be an important consideration in choosing how you garden. Another very important factor is the source of water. Right now, I only have this one faucet on the back of my house. So for now, I have to plan my garden with this limitation of just one water source. I do have another faucet in the front yard really close to this side corner, and I may have to rely on running a hose from that faucet for anything that I grow in this area. And I'm thinking this might be my herb garden. But the fence poses a few issues as far as running that hose. This is where the observation comes in. I'll actually move the hose back and forth and observe how easy it is. Observe if it works and if that's a viable option. Another important factor to consider the slope, where water drains within the landscape. Now, behind me in the middle of that fence, that's the high spot in this yard. And from there, the water drains in all directions, including toward the camera. So I'm actually walking downhill slightly. And this will influence how I design the garden, because this low spot I can expect to be the wettest in the yard. That high spot, because all the water is draining off, it's probably going to be the driest spot. So when I decide where the different garden spaces will be placed and what type of plants I put into those spaces, the water becomes an important factor. And that's why I recommend waiting to see the weather patterns through the course of a year. Because when it snows, where does the snow melt go? And when it rains, especially a heavy rain, where does that water go? It makes a difference in how you put your plants in the ground. Also consider animal impact on your space. As I'm out here filming, I have a visitor. I've been told that rabbits are a big problem in this neighborhood, and I can see already, even though I'm standing here, this rabbit is coming up for a visit. My neighbor told me that the rabbits in this particular area actually live underneath the shed. My guess is this is their entrance, and that's where this rabbit was headed. By taking some time and observing the patterns of the wildlife, I can get an idea of how to deal with it in the best way. I've also seen evidence of gophers and voles with various holes and places where I've taken a step and sunk down a few inches. So those are other animals that I'll have to deal with. And if you have dogs or cats, look for their patterns as well. Dogs tend to run along fence lines, particularly if there's a neighboring dog and they like to run and chase each other through the fence. If you have a cat, well, look at where the cat likes to prowl. By taking the time to see their patterns, it may save you some effort in putting your beds in place. Because if I design my garden with a bed that runs all the way through the fence, and then my dog continually runs through that garden space, I've wasted a lot of effort. Observe the microclimates in your yard. I'm on the north side of this shed in the shade, and it's almost high noon. That tells me that this area probably gets very little sun. Now, I'm going to continue my observations. Remember, this is my first day, but I'm guessing that when the sun sets, this area might have some sun. But in the area where I know the sun is setting right now, I see my house, which means it's going to be casting shade at about that same time. I'm guessing that this area is probably in shade most of the year. It's helpful to know that because that will influence the type of plants that I put right here. I'm guessing this is a microclimate that's the complete opposite. This area gets full sun all year round because there's no obstructions. But more importantly, look at these trees behind me. They're conifers. They won't drop their needles during the winter. And along with my neighbor's greenhouse, those trees and that structure will block some of those northerly winds during the storms of winter. That's going to protect any of the plants I put into this space. So I'm guessing with the full sun and the protection from the winds, that this area is going to be the very first one to melt during the spring, which means the plants that I put here will have a head start on everything else. I'll have to observe it over time, but I think I'll get an entire extra zone worth of protection and heat in this microclimate right here. Another factor I think about in designing the gardens is taking into account my own gardening habits. I've got grand ideas. I've got sun, I've got water, I have an idea about the animals, the drainage, all of those factors. But that doesn't mean a lot if I don't take into account how I garden. Because if I can put the most beautiful space way over there, but if it's so far out that I never go to it, it's wasted. I've wasted my time, my energy, my money, because I didn't take into account how I garden. For new gardeners, I always recommend starting small and starting close to their water source, close to their house, so that it's easy to garden. As you get more experience, you can spread out, because I'm willing to take the time to walk over there to my orchard. It doesn't take a lot of work, but I'm not willing to walk all that way for an herb garden where I want to pick something fresh for the evening's dinner. Take into account how you garden in deciding where the different components are going to go into place. And observe the plants that are actually growing in your landscape. Now, I'm lucky that I don't have a lot in the front yard, but I do have this beautiful specimen of a plant behind me. But it's a problem. Why is it a problem? Because that's where the faucet is. And that's my primary entrance back and forth to my future gardens. And it's in the way. That means it has to go. And that's something that I struggled with for years. Somebody planted that, and it's years old, and it looks wonderful, but it doesn't fit with my plan. So even though I like the plant, I'm going to have to cut it down and remove it because it's in the way of how I'm going to garden. You may have to take out some plants, maybe even plants you put in the ground, if they're in the way. I've covered what I consider to be the most important factors in observation, which I think is the most important step in garden design. I'll be doing this over a long period of time. Now, I do have a lot of space, and it's going to take a lot of work to put all of the gardens in. The concepts are the same for a small space as they are for a big space. Even if you're just gardening in buckets on a patio, the same factors play a role, just on a smaller scale. And as you begin to expand your garden, those same factors come into play. So the best time to start observing your space and determining where you're going to put your gardens or your pots is today. Start looking at the sun. Start looking at the shade from the structures. Think about those microclimates. Think about the weather over 4 seasons and the drainage. Think about the animals. Think about all of the stuff that I've demonstrated today, and it should help you in laying out a garden design. And as I continue this process, I'll be showing you every step that I take in designing and then building a garden. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know below. If you want to see the rest of these videos as I build my gardens, well then subscribe to the Gardener Scott channel if you haven't already done so. And if you like this video, you can give me a thumbs up and share it. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.